Thanks for Farmigo and Food Tech Connect for inviting me. I'm excited to share my story about community. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself and why I'm doing this and spending all my time thinking about it. I've been obsessed with food since a very young age. My parents were kind enough to kind of have us think outside the box about food. So, they were giving us sushi in the 80s, which was unheard of. Still, unless you lived in Japan, and I would go back there with Mr. Kin and learn how to roll the sushi and bring it into show and tell, and everyone was like, "What are you doing?" When I was like 8. And so, that led to things like, before Food Network was around, it would be like PBS, Jan Can Cook. I don't know if anyone remembers Jan Can Cook and Julia Child and all those great shows. So food's always been a really big part of my life. And even through college, I would always cook a lot for lots of people. But I never went into the realm of like working in the kitchen, except for a small little stage when I was like 13. And after college, I actually lived in Tel Aviv. Danielle actually lived there too, and I was there. And I caught the bug for the startups there. And I was working for a startup company, and that's kind of everything that I've done post-college. But on the side, there was really no good Mexican food in Tel Aviv. And so my buddies and I, one from Texas, we just started a pop-up taco stand. And we would just go onto the street and literally make everything from scratch, corn tortillas, everything, and just start hawking them. And that was kind of my first lesson in food entrepreneurship. And that led to catering gigs and a whole bunch of other stuff. So after the startup folded, which they typically do, I moved back to the States, and one of the things I did, I moved back to Washington, D.C., and the thing about D.C. is they don't really have a cafe culture. So that's not like Europe or the Middle East or California or New York even. And so we were like, hey, we want to start a cafe, but we didn't have a lot of money. So one of the things that we did is we're like, okay, how can we test this concept without breaking the bank? So we went to a bar called Darnell's, and we said, hey, you're closed during the day. We're gonna come in here and set up a cafe. And this was 3 years ago. And so he was like, okay. So within a month and a half, we went from the concept to actually opening. And one of the big things that attracts me to cafe is obviously that third space, that community. You kind of work, but you also can like hang out and meet people. And so that was kind of the premise behind the cafe we started, called the Blind Dog Cafe. And so that was a really fascinating insight into what it's like to start a brick and mortar. And so from that experience, I was traveling to Guatemala with my girlfriend. And when we travel, obviously we love to taste the food of those countries, how we understand the culture. And a very weird thing happened. We couldn't find any Guatemalan food. And so I don't know if you've ever been in a country and not been able to find the food of that country, but it sucks. So, I said to her, listen, if this is the last thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna find some. So we literally went on a 2-hour search to the market, street, like everywhere you could think of. And we came up empty-handed. And so on our way back, I was super bummed. We just saw this young avocado seller. He was like 11. And we asked him, just out of desperation, like, do you know where we can find some Guatemalan food? My girlfriend speaks fluent Spanish. And he looked it up with these big eyes, and a smile came across his face, and he was like, yeah, at my mom's house. So we high-five, like, this is amazing. We followed him back to his mom's house, swings open the door, and there she was making the most epic Guatemalan meal. And I was like, this is amazing. And as those smells hit my nose, I was like, this is magic. And we go in, and we're meeting with them, and talking, etc., finding out what she's making, and it was like such an adventure. And a few thoughts came across my mind then. It was like, one, I felt bad for everyone eating at those crappy tourist restaurants. And the other thing was like, why was this so hard? For me to be able to find this amazing food, and for this woman who loved to cook to be able to showcase that, and maybe make some extra income doing it. And that was really the seed of Feastly, which was, we realized that it wasn't just this woman there. There are millions of people all over the world who have these underutilized or non-utilized skills that to tap into, whether that's the home cook or the line cook at the restaurant who's working extremely hard hours for not great pay, in not great conditions, and all they want to do is make the food that's true to them. So that's what we're doing at Feastly. We want to be able to connect all those folks, or I would say empower all those cooks out there to be able to do the thing that they're passionate about, meet people, and maybe make some extra income doing it. And so let's see what else about my story. So I think when I think about community and how we're impacting that, there's kind of on 3 different points. I think the first is that, you know, we really look at the dining room table as the original social network. So how do we bring people back to that place? I think a lot of the restaurant industry doesn't really do a great job of that. So, you know, we've all been to restaurants here in New York where you're sitting 2 inches away from somebody, and all you're trying to do is not interact with them. And it's the most bizarre thing. All you're gonna do is like focus on what's in front of you. And I don't get it. It's like we're all sharing this experience. Why should that be weird? I think the other thing is the dynamic between the person creating the food and the person receiving the food. I think a lot of times in our current dining establishments, there's a power dynamics there, and a separation between the cook and you as well as the person who's serving it. And so how do we switch that from kind of a receiver and a giver to co-creators? We're all part of this. And I think the last thing around this is the connections between the cooks themselves. I think one of the things that doesn't happen enough is for this creative community to be able to find and collaborate with each other. And that's another big thing that we're trying to encourage. So, you know, whether that's the maker of Namiku working with one of our chefs because they're like, we love Namiku, or somebody else who's up and coming and they saw in their chef that they're really inspired from. Like, we believe all those people should be working together. You know, and I would say that our big goal here at Feastly is that no matter what city you're in, so whether you're in Bangkok or Bangalore or Boston, you'll always be able to find that authentic meal for you and hear the stories behind that food. And I think that's really what makes it meaningful.
Thank you so much. I love how everyone loves food. So